In what many observers are already describing as one of the most explosive and emotionally charged political confrontations in South Africa's recent history, a grieving widow stunned the nation when she publicly confronted senior African National Congress officials at the party's headquarters, demanding immediate arrests in connection with her husband's death. The dramatic scene unfolded under the glare of television lights and in front of a tightly packed media crowd, transforming what was expected to be a routine political engagement into a moment of raw confrontation that sent shockwaves through political circles and ordinary households alike. Witnesses described an atmosphere thick with emotion, palpable tension, and barely restrained outrage as the widow, visibly shaken but unwavering in her resolve, pushed her way into the press room and addressed senior ANC leaders directly, refusing to be silenced or sidelined. With her voice steady but charged with grief and anger, she declared that she would not allow her husband's death to be buried beneath what she called lies, deception, and deliberate inaction. Her words echoed through the room, cutting through the murmurs of journalists and party officials alike. She accused those present not only of failing to act but of actively conspiring, turning a blind eye, and suppressing critical information that could have saved her husband's life. The demand she made was blunt and uncompromising: those responsible must be arrested immediately, without delay or political protection. The force of her statement drew audible gasps from the room, leaving even seasoned political reporters momentarily stunned. As some of the ANC's top leaders attempted to dismiss her accusations as baseless and politically motivated, the widow stood her ground. She rejected any suggestion that her actions were driven by politics, insisting instead that she was motivated solely by a desire for justice. Locking eyes with senior party figures, she accused them of stonewalling investigations, mishandling intelligence, and making decisions that knowingly placed her husband in danger. Her language was precise, her tone resolute, and her message unmistakable: if the rule of law meant anything in South Africa, it had to apply equally to everyone, regardless of status or influence. The confrontation quickly escalated beyond a personal exchange into a national spectacle. Camera flashes filled the room as journalists realized they were witnessing something far more consequential than a scripted political briefing. Sources close to the widow later revealed that her appearance had been carefully planned and meticulously prepared. Over several weeks, she had allegedly gathered a substantial body of evidence, including confidential documents, encrypted audio recordings, and witness statements from individuals who feared coming forward publicly. According to those familiar with her preparations, this material paints a disturbing picture of negligence, corruption, and deliberate suppression of warnings related to her husband's security. Insiders claim that the evidence includes minutes from secret meetings, private communications between high-ranking officials, and internal directives that suggest a coordinated effort to ignore or downplay credible threats. One source described her case not as an emotional outburst driven by grief, but as a carefully constructed legal and moral challenge to the ruling party. In their words, this was not a moment of impulsive anger, but a calculated and determined effort that could potentially shake the very foundations of the ANC. Political analysts were quick to grasp the gravity of what had unfolded. Commentators described the incident as historic, noting how rare it is for a grieving family member to confront the ruling party so openly and so directly, especially under the scrutiny of live media coverage. They emphasized that this was no longer merely a personal appeal for justice, but a public indictment of the ANC's leadership and internal culture. According to analysts, the confrontation exposed deep fractures within the party, suggesting that internal accountability mechanisms may have failed in ways far more serious than previously acknowledged. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, social media platforms erupted with responses from across the country. Hashtags calling for justice and demanding an independent investigation into the death began trending nationwide. Thousands of citizens expressed solidarity with the widow, voicing their anger and frustration over what they perceived as entrenched corruption and impunity within the ruling elite. Television networks interrupted regular programming to broadcast live updates, while radio stations were inundated with calls from listeners demanding transparency, accountability, and action. As the day progressed, the outrage spilled onto the streets. Spontaneous demonstrations erupted in major cities, including Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. Protesters gathered outside ANC offices holding placards that read messages such as "Justice for Netim," "No one is above the law," and "End corruption now." The demonstrations reflected a broader sense of public disillusionment, with many participants describing the widow's stand as a reflection of their own frustrations with unchecked political power and systemic failures. Civic leaders and activists warned that unless the government responded decisively, public anger could escalate into wider unrest. Meanwhile, the widow's legal team confirmed that preparations were underway to file formal complaints against several senior ANC officials whom she believes were directly involved in concealing information or failing to act on credible threats. Legal experts noted that if her evidence withstands scrutiny, the consequences for the ANC could be severe. Potential outcomes include high-profile resignations, internal disciplinary proceedings, and even criminal prosecutions. Constitutional law specialists described the case as one that could become one of the most significant corruption scandals in South Africa's democratic history, depending on the strength and traceability of the evidence presented. Behind the scenes, the impact of the confrontation was reportedly felt deeply within the ANC itself. Party insiders described the incident as a moment of reckoning that caught leadership off guard. According to one source who spoke on condition of anonymity, no one anticipated that the widow would confront the leadership so deliberately and publicly, especially with apparent confidence in the evidence she possessed. Emergency meetings were allegedly convened shortly after the incident, with intense debates unfolding behind closed doors. These internal discussions reportedly revealed growing divisions within the party. Some members urged full cooperation with investigators, warning that continued denial or deflection could inflict irreversible damage on the ANC's credibility. Others advocated for a more defensive posture, arguing that the allegations should be framed as part of a broader political campaign aimed at weakening the party ahead of future elections. Despite these differing strategies, the party's official response was limited to a brief statement dismissing the claims as unfounded, a move that failed to quell public anger or reassure a skeptical nation. Pressure also mounted on President Cyril Ramaphosa to address the situation directly. Opposition parties quickly seized on the moment, calling for an independent commission of inquiry into the death and the allegations raised by the widow. The Democratic Alliance voiced open support for her demands, while the economic freedom fighters called for an emergency parliamentary sitting to debate what they described as systemic corruption and impunity within the ruling party. Civil society organizations, human rights lawyers, and anti-corruption groups publicly pledged their support, offering legal assistance and advocacy to ensure the case would not be buried under political pressure. Across the country, public opinion appeared to shift noticeably. For many citizens, the widow's actions came to symbolize more than a personal quest for justice. They represented a collective outcry against years of perceived abuse of power, corruption, and institutional decay. Protesters described her courage as an inspiration, saying that for too long the powerful had escaped accountability while ordinary people bore the consequences. Others framed the confrontation as a defining test for South Africa's democracy, questioning whether justice could truly prevail in a system they viewed as deeply compromised. As night fell over Johannesburg, reporters remained stationed outside ANC headquarters, waiting for further developments or a decisive response from party leaders. The widow, however, had already left the scene, surrounded by supporters and members of her legal team. Her final words to the media were resolute and uncompromising. She declared that she would not be silenced, would not accept half-truths, and would not rest until everyone who played a role in her husband's death was held fully accountable under the law. Her declaration resonated across the country, echoing the sentiments of a public weary of unanswered questions and broken trust. Now, the nation waits. Questions hang heavily in the air. which officials will ultimately be named, how the ANC will respond to this unprecedented challenge, and whether South Africa's justice system will rise to the occasion. With investigations looming and political pressure intensifying, one reality is clear. What began as a widow's fight for justice has evolved into a national movement, a tipping point that could reshape the country's political landscape. It is no longer the struggle of one family alone, but a broader battle for truth, transparency, and the very soul of South African democracy, underscored by a single, unwavering principle that no one, regardless of power or position, should stand above accountability.